I don't know if you ever played The Sims, but
Oh
the
yeah,
cruel things that you can do to your little Sims, catch them on fire, make them drown in a pool. And
send a natural disaster their way.
yeah, just fuck with them. That was basically my process early on, and kind of paid the price for it. So,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a podcast for creative people, formerly titled Creative Ops for a long time. But it's a new name, same podcast, same host, Christopher Talon. If you're wondering who I am the host of this podcast. I made the music you're listening to now, and I wrote a book called Switchers, which is a novel about teens in 1996 who get stuck in a time travel war against their adult selves. It's enough about me, though. Today I talked to J.B. Velasquez, another writer who lives out in Arizona, and he wrote some really cool books. One called Tourist Trapped, about a guy who gets stuck in the afterlife when he goes on a psilocybin trip, and another book called Every Last One that takes place in the future, and it's super sci-fi. And we'll talk about both of those books and quite a bit more. We talk about inspiration, process, navigating publishing and promotion, and writing about drugs. So stick around for all that stuff and check out what JB's got going on here in the show notes too, all right? I'm going to let JB get things started by just kind of giving us his elevator pitch on his two books. So take it away, JB.
so I guess I could start with Tourist Trap, which is my debut novel that came out a year ago in February of 2023. This one is it's hard to categorize. I call it like metaphysical portal fantasy.
Yeah.
Basically, it's urban fantasy. There's no wizards and orcs and dwarfs and things like that. It's set in contemporary time, but it's a portal fantasy because the protagonist ends up traveling to the afterlife by way of psilocybin compound that he kind of follows this girl as people do. And, she's in this psychedelic cult. And so he partakes in one of these rituals. And so they do this so that when they go into it's called the in-between, when they go up there, you have, you don't have a body. And so you have all this freedom to do all kinds of, out of body kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it's not recreational. It's more of like a spiritual training, and then whatever they can do there, they're able to come back to earth and basically be superheroes. But it doesn't really get into that. But what happens is he ends up going up there and he gets stuck up there. He's not able to return. And so that's kind of the premise, is that he's up there and he's trying to figure out how to get back to his body on earth.
The first time when I was introduced to your book, my first thought was it's kind of like drugs meets the Good Place.
Yeah, that's pretty apt.
Yeah.
The Good Place was definitely some inspiration. Yeah, there's this song by the Talking Heads called Heaven, and I don't know if you've heard it or not, but it basically talks about heaven is a place where nothing ever happens because there's no death, and so there's really nothing to strive for, and so there's a verse in there that talks about like you go to this place, you go to this bar, and they're playing your favorite song, and as soon as the song ends, they play it again, and as soon as it ends, they play it again.
Yeah.
It's like, how long could you listen to your favorite song, until it starts getting boring?
Right.
Yeah. Every Last One is a dystopian science fiction. It takes place in 2087 in Canada, and the reason it takes place in Canada, this is when I originally started this story. It had to do. There was an alien craft had come to Earth.
Yeah.
They had responded to we'd put out signals back in like 1978. With like different. Have you heard of this? This is Caltech. Some researcher in Caltech. He sent all these like a collection of music, all kinds of like world music, and he basically sent it by radio wave, and hoping to get some kind of like extraterrestrial response. Anyway, so they respond to that and decide to come, and they're 40 light years away. So they end up coming to Earth, and they end up landing in Nunavut, Canada, which is like, basically
way
like
up there.
way up there. Yeah. just because there's nobody around. They don't want to get discovered or whatever. And so that's where they end up going. So I was like, well, so just for the story to make sense, it had to be kind of in proximity. So yeah, it takes place or at least it starts in Winnipeg. And so the protagonist, she's a cop in the sort of the regional police force. And she's an investigator, and she comes across that she discovers that some of the higher ups in the regime are kind of in on this global sex trafficking operation. And so she's basically trying to figure out, how do we get these guys, because they're like basically our bosses.
Yeah.
They tell her to drop the investigation. They make threats. So she ends up in a shootout. They end up killing her father. This is all in the very first of the book. And so she has a bounty on her head, and she has to escape. And so the rest of the story is her and her close team, like escaping the city and trying to get away. But eventually they get pursued, and I can't give away the end, but she turns that around towards the end. She stops running and finally stands up to these guys.
Those books sound great, right? Go to the show notes, open up 2 tabs, one for each of those books, so that you can look at them and then, of course, buy them. All right, next we're going to talk about how JB was able to get book 2 out so fast, and also what part of the store you might find his books, because they're kind of different. So, yeah, let's get to that.
Actually, so my new release was the first book that I ever started writing. So I started writing that in 2020.
Okay.
And I didn't know at the time, I didn't know anything about like story structure or like character development or, any of the sort of writing.
Well, not in a classically trained way, but, I think people underestimate themselves just because if you watch TV, if you watch movies, you have the general intuitive sense of, how to move from beginning, middle, end. But
yeah. But just very rough, And so when I first started it, it was a totally different book. There was an alien rescue. There was a zombie virus. I mean, I put everything, the cool thing that I could think of. I put it in this book, and it just went off the rails. And it's like this is fun to write, but it's not. I mean, it's not a coherent I mean, in my head it was coherent, but it's not marketable.
There's just too much in the soup.
There's too much in there, yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, I can't keep hacking away at this, So I put that aside, and then I wrote Tourist Trap, and it took me about a year, I guess, from start to finish on that one. So I guess it took me about a year to write that one and publish it. And then when I published that one, then I went back to my new book, Every Last One, and just basically just did a huge like renovation. Basically, like what is it in this story that that is nearly complete, or that kind of completes a story arc, and so I basically trimmed everything that wasn't that from it, and then built on that.
Yeah, I had to do the same thing with Switchers. Switchers was the first novel that I actually finished. I guess I started one that I just kind of never came back to. But Switchers had 2 competing world-ending things happening, and I eventually was like, I think one's probably enough.
That was my issue. There was too many, like, your protagonist usually has some kind of tragic backstory, and she had 2, and my editor was like, that's great, but your audience is gonna kind of gravitate toward one or the other, and that's gonna weaken. So you're gonna have to lose one part of that backstory and just focus on the most immediate one. So yeah, it was a lot of just killing darlings. Yeah, there's a lot of darlings just like left on the floor. The cutting room floor.
I can't remember where the quote comes from now, exactly who said it, but
Stephen King. Well, I know it's in his book. It's in his book on writing, but I don't know if he made it up.
Yeah. Yeah, on writing. Great book too. I've heard some writers say that they didn't think it was a great book, and I'm like, why? They're like, well, I learned a lot of that stuff in college. I'm like, okay, but if you didn't go to college
Mm-hmm.
for writing, that's probably the
Right.
best book you can have. And even if you did go to school for writing, I think it's still very helpful to hear from, whether you like him or not, a guy who sells bajillions of copies of his books.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like an inside look,
Yeah.
sneak
Yeah.
peek into like what that process was like for him and like his whole career.
Yeah.
you know so I
Yeah.
found it really encouraging that in the beginning he was such a failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
He just kept going.
Yeah. That's what it really
Look at him
takes
now.
too, is just keep moving. I wonder if he would have self-published if he was, young and starting out in publishing now after all the rejection that he had gotten. Because it seems a lot easier to do now. I mean,
Yeah.
I was looking for a small publisher, and then I finally talked to one who was like, we'll split the profits, the royalties 60, I think it was 65-35 or 60-40 or 70-30. And I was
Hmm.
just like, and I'm going to get the smaller end of that?
Hmm.
No, no, that's okay. I'll just find my own editor and cover guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm working on a blog right now that kind of talks about, the differences between like, what is an indie author, but then also breaking down like traditional publishing, self-publishing, and like, the benefits.
Vanity
And
presses.
I don't get into vanity presses, but maybe I should. Yeah.
If nothing else, just have like one paragraph that says, anytime I saw this on I'm on like a Michigan authors group on Facebook, and
Uh-huh.
somebody posted, I'm talking to this small press and they want my bank routing information and my Amazon login information. And everyone's like, no, 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 no. That's a vanity press. Get out of there. Get out of there.
Run. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
shouldn't ever have to
Um,
pay to get published unless you're doing it on your own and you're paying the people that can help you actually put your product together,
mhm. Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
So these two books sound like they could very easily be placed in different parts of a bookstore. So do you consider yourself a sci-fi guy? Do you just consider yourself kind of a dark fiction with a lean towards fantasy and sci-fi? Or where would you place J.B. Velasquez?
That's a really good question. I don't think that I'm a sci-fi guy. In fact, I never really read sci-fi
Mhm.
growing up, so it's not like I don't. So yeah, I don't know where that came from. That inspiration. But there was a story about these aliens, and it's a little bit humorous. Um, but that was more. It was less about the science fiction and more about like I guess the absurdity of these characters
Mm.
so so I think that I'm kind of what I like to read is I like to read literary fiction, but I also like to read magical realism.
Okay.
And so there's some kind of there's an element there about it's not necessarily like straight fantasy where there's established lore, uh, or magic rules
Yeah.
necessarily, but kind of creating sort of an absurdist where the magic is whether it's magic or whether it's some like a scientific uh, element to it, that kind of I guess pushes that sort of absurdistness
Yeah.
absurdistness
Yeah.
around. It's hard to explain. So yeah, I think I'm more. I mean, I couldn't say if that there was one particular genre, because it's less about the genre for me and more about like I guess the storytelling, and sometimes it takes different forms.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. I read probably mostly horror, but then just anything that's anything that's fast paced. And so I've written stories that kind of go all over the place too. My next book is more horror than it is really any sci-fi, but the first book, I guess, would get classified sci-fi just because it's time travel. But yeah, I don't really see myself as necessarily one genre kind of guy. But
Mm-hmm.
we both like Stephen King, and he's also kind of a genre unto himself. He can be horror, he can be fantasy, he can
Mm-hmm.
be straight up sci-fi, just kind of all over the place. But the one thing that, yeah, that I also like to come back to is bringing a little bit of absurdity into reality and kind of seeing how they mix. I'm not a, on a different world or in a, flying dragons. Nothing against that stuff. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't tickle my brain creatively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so Kurt Vonnegut is my favorite author of all time. And, so people would say, how would you categorize Kurt Vonnegut? And so some people would say, well, he writes science fiction.
Mm.
And it's like, well, yeah, I guess technically it can be categorized as that, but to me, that's not, it's not that's like, that doesn't describe his writing to me.
Right.
It's like the way he writes and the way he tells stories. And so it's sort of, genre doesn't really come into it.
Yeah. He kind of, I guess, is kind of a blend of just pure absurdity and a little bit of science fiction.
Yeah.
Like his
Satire.
book, Timequake. I
Yeah.
guess that's a time
Science fiction.
travel ish,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it more than anything, it's just, wouldn't it be weird if all of a sudden we lived in
Yeah.
reverse for 10 years and then we're
Uh-huh.
just stuck in our bodies doing all the things that we had done? And
Yeah.
what would we do when all of a sudden we caught back up to time again? Like,
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, mark that as sci-fi because time, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I always have to kind of, it's like working backwards to figure out what the genre is for me. It's like,
Yeah.
it's wouldn't it be weird if, and like that's really what it's about for me. And then, how we get there, whether it's magic or whether it's, some technology or what, whatever gets it there.
Next, me and JB talk a little bit about inspiration and process. Not so much where do your ideas come from, because that's a question you should never ask a writer, but yeah, more or less that.
It started with something totally different and
Yeah.
ended up being, when I pruned everything away from it, ended up with, a different story, so um I think sometimes that's writing can be like that, like
Yeah.
sometimes it's, you don't really know what you're writing and you know until you've written enough to where you start to see the story emerge from the writing itself.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always have to start like with um with a complete concept or like a complete story arc, front to back. I think sometimes you just write and then the story kind of emerges from that writing, and you keep what works and toss out what doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you're a pantser.
It sounds like that, and that's what, yeah, that's definitely what I was doing with every last one in the beginning,
Yeah.
and I had to, in order to make it into a readable story or at least a marketable story,
Sure.
I had to apply, um, certain plot beats, and to make sure that, like that it was actually following um, a story, a story framework.
An efficient arc. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think I started it that way and ended up, becoming more, of a plotter on the back end, to
Mm.
get it through publication. And um and I think now I've kind of, I'm more on the plotter side. I'm writing, like, my current work in progress is I'm doing it completely opposite. I'm starting with the story beats, and I'm, you know, spending a lot of time just like thinking and mulling over, and what asking, and like a lot of my writing right now and at this stage of the game is just like writing questions to myself, like, well then, why is he motivated to do that? Or, why is that so important? And so just like writing a lot of questions in the notes panel. By the way, Scrivener, do you use Scrivener?
No.
Or do you use, oh, well, I'm a big fan of Scrivener. I'm not an affiliate or anything. I'm not making money off of it, but it's a really great way to organize everything, because you can keep everything in these little, like on one side, you have all these, I guess like mini files, or, so you can separate them by chapters or scenes or whatever, and you can move them around. And then on the other side, you can put notes, like,
so it's almost like having everything on a set of digital flashcards, and you can kind of pull as you need.
But it's all in one thing, and so I really enjoy using that. It really helps with organizing it. But that's a lot to say. I think I'm more on the plotter side of things at this point, just because the amount of work that it takes to do a lot of that trimming. So I'm just seeing what it's like to start with that structure going in, and then once that feels fairly cohesive, then I'll kind of go back and write.
Well, this is as good a spot as any to just dive all into process. I love talking to writers about process, because everyone's is a little bit different, and everyone can take something from somebody else's and apply it to their own. So I guess just to paint the picture of kind of like what I'm looking for here, I'll go through mine briefly. I'll get an idea, usually don't have any idea how it's going to end. And then I'll start with that idea, kind of write a little bit just to kind of play with characters and go like, okay, I know who these characters are now, or at least, the main ones. And then I'll start into the story, and I plot on like an individual session basis. I go, this is what I want to write today, bullet, 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 and start from here to get to here. And then from there, I'll just kind of write off that little, single session outline until I've got, note these yellow legal pads. I'll write 2 to 5 pages on a legal pad, type it up, editing a little bit as I go. And then usually like halfway through the book, I'll stop, print it out, go by hand through everything, type up all the little fixes, and then keep moving into the second half, and then do the whole thing over again when I'm done. So with that process, that, I guess, macro overview of my process, what does yours kind of look like from a day-to-day, halfway through, all the way through, kind of a synopsis?
Yeah, well, I think that's evolving. Like it was definitely, like I said, it was different when I first started, and it was just it was just like just freewheel, like writing. And basically the way I described it is like, I would write my characters into these corners, and then have to figure out, well, how do I get them out of that situation?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, that was my process, is like, back them into a corner, figure out how to get them out, back them into another corner, figure out how to get them out.
Just playing God with your little Jobs all around.
Just being, like, I don't know if you ever played The Sims, but the cruel things that you can do to your little Sims, catch them on fire, make them drown in a pool.
Send a natural disaster their way.
Yeah, just fuck with them. That was basically my process early on, and kind of paid the price for it. So I'm experimenting with a different method now, I guess. And so I don't know, I don't really have a, like, this is the way I do it. It's like I'm trying different things to see, what's going to be the most efficient, what's going to be the most I don't like, I'll do it, like I don't, nobody likes to kill their darlings, but nobody likes to do it. I'll do it if I have to do it, but if I can minimize the amount of trimming that I have to do later, to me, it's just kind of an efficiency thing.
Yeah.
But but that's part of the, I accept that's part of the writing process, is you're just going to write a lot of stuff that, doesn't make it into the manuscript.
Yeah.
Like backstories. When I do these character profiles where I write all about these characters. It has nothing to do with the story itself, but it's like, where are they from? What kind of, socioeconomic background did they come from? What kind of trials in their life did they face before this point?
Yeah.
What kind of music did they listen to? How do they dress? What are they like at a party? And so I kind of write out all of, everything about this character. So I really kind of feel it, but like maybe 10% of that or 15% of that actually makes it into the actual manuscript.
Yeah.
But that's just for me, like, to understand like who I'm creating. And you have to write and write and write in order to create that. So
yeah, I talked to Brandon Scott on the podcast, and he said the same thing when he wrote a series of books about voodoo, and specifically there was like a lot of mythological voodoo entities as characters. And I was just like, man, did you just have to study your ass off to put all this done? He's like, bro, I studied so much and only a sliver of it actually made it into the writing.
Yep. Yeah. So it's there's I guess there's different ways to do it, and I'm open at this point, only having written 2 books. I'm open to trying different methods to see what works for me.
Yeah.
So
well,
right now I'm trying to,
as far as your plotting goes though, do you kind of figure out through a part of a story, or do you kind of have a whole beginning to end sort of mapped out?
that's kind of what I'm shooting for, is having the whole thing mapped out. So I'm trying to create the bones of the story, that are flexible enough for me to infuse it with life.
Yeah.
And like that, and be, in a sense, basically plotting first and then pantsing afterwards, to where I can, but I'm pantsing to certain points. Like I have a direction. So if I'm writing, if I'm in one particular beat of the story, I know where the next beat is.
Yeah.
And so I can play with whatever, however I want to get them there, from point A to point B. But yeah, so at this point in my process, I'm kind of, I'm just trying to get really solid about, what those plot points are going to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you ever find yourself deviating away from what you thought it was going to be and kind of be like, oh, well, I'm going to have to rehaul this a little bit?
Yeah. And you of course, and that's what's,
I feel like
I'm
that's the fun of writing, is if it's all nope, I got to stay with the outline, then at that point it feels a little bit too like paint by numbersy for me personally. Not saying anything bad about it for other people, because some people work exactly that way and they're like, nope, I never deviate.
Yeah. And I don't want to be that rigid. And that's why I'm taking such a long time plotting, because I want to make sure that, there's going to be I'm going to run into where I may need to change something, and so it's got to be flexible enough to where that's we can make that change, or we can substitute different things, to make the story better, or to make it more. So
every now
yeah,
and then you'll
I
be
think,
walking or you'll be in the shower and you'll have this aha thing where you're like, oh, no, I was thinking about this all wrong. They need to be doing it this way instead of the way that I had them doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I want to spend a lot of time in this part of it, so that there's a lot of room to make those changes. And that is actually, it's already happened, where it's like, well, I'm not super sold on, this mechanism here, like maybe we could make that better.
Yeah.
So then it's like question mark, hold off on that. Don't develop that further, because we're not sure we're going to keep that yet.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a placeholder.
Yeah. Yeah. I find myself oftentimes too, like right now, the one I'm trying to finish up and have out this summer. My wife is my first reader, and she's going through the first 100 or so pages. She's said, "Oh, I'm really liking how you kind of go back and forth in terms of like, the story is told in a current, like as it's happening timeline, present moment timeline, but then there's just these couple of scenes where it goes back to when the character was really little or when they were a teenager that kind of add input into why they are the way they are now." And my wife was like, how do you keep those timelines in your head? And I go, honestly, most of the time I get to a point where I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to explain this? I'm just going to go and break the timeline and go show instead of tell, right?
Yeah.
So it, as much as I'd like to take credit for being like a genius who can just balance all these different timelines and make them magically work that way, it's more by accident where I'm like, oh, you know what? It would make more sense if, okay, I'll just write that in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Writing's fun like that. I like the spontaneity of it. I'm very ADD too, so I think if I had an outline, I would probably just out of to spite my own brain, I'd probably be like, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to start something different.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, it's like, I like having an outline, but it's like, it's in pencil.
Mm-hmm.
It's subject to change. It's flexible.
Yeah. For when you
Yeah.
do think, oh, you know what? Instead of being on the offensive here, I can put them on the defensive and bring this other person in or whatever the thing might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a different part of the writing process. It's, the, I, because there's the part where, like POV, for example, like, if you're like, I don't know at this point what's going to be the best, point of view. Like, is it going to be, past tense? Is it going to be, first person? Is it going to, like and so I don't want to have to decide that right now, and I don't have to, because, let's figure out, what the story is, and then I'll figure out how I want to tell it.
Yeah.
Like what'll be the best way to tell that story.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by, just kind of creating the story itself, first, and then how I want to tell it, whether it's POV or whether it's what kind of, the narration of it,
Yeah. You're gonna have the omniscient God narrator, or are you gonna have the main character? Yeah.
Yeah, because that was one thing with every last one in the beginning is that I started with a third person omniscient narration, and ran into the, what I didn't know then, what is a very common problem with omniscient narrators, is that there's a lot of head hopping. And so I'd be in a scene and there's multiple characters, and so I'd go from, from this character to, whatever this other character was doing, and, didn't realize that was a problem until I got, beta feedback, and they were like,
right.
My head is spinning right now. I don't know, I don't know what's going. There's so much happening. So then I had to figure out, well, I guess I have to change it. I have to give it a specific. I've got to, I want to maintain all these different perspectives, but I have to do it in a way that doesn't confuse the readers. And so what I ended up having to do, is creating a separate. Each chapter is one particular POV. And so sometimes what that end up doing is it isn't completely linear. Sometimes it's like stacked, so I'm telling the story from one particular perspective, but something's actually happening during that time that we're not privy to. And so in the next chapter, it'll bounce to somebody else, and it may back up the timeline a little bit, but now you see a little bit more action that's unfolding on the other side, of, and so that was, figuring that out, that's what took so long to get the second one out, because, or technically my first one, is because I had to totally rearrange the way that I was telling that story.
Yeah, there's a writer named Stephen James who does a lot of like high tech crime thrillers, and he does that same thing where you'll see the main character racing to the scene, and then jump down into the next paragraph separate, and then you're seeing it from the criminal's perspective, and then he might jump in, and then you'll see it from the person who is being held hostage from the criminal, like all kind of, this is what happened, back it up to the start of that, this is what happened here, back it up to the start of that, this is what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
And when done right, it actually works really well. I think when you're the creator and you're doing it, you're like, oh, is this going to be clunky? Is this going to be too much? Is people are going to be like, move forward already? But yeah, you just got to write it and see, and then mess with it.
Yeah. And that's mostly what I was doing with this, like writing is rewriting, right?
Forever.
So, yeah. It's just reworking it, retooling it, refining it, throwing some of it out, adding bits here and there. I mean, it's all so.
Yeah, it's perspective is just such a strange thing, because there's really not a wrong way to do it, and you can go omniscient and jump from person to person and kind of like briefly get into the head of, and then go back out without necessarily saying that's what you're doing, but then it has to be obvious to the reader that that's what's happening. So it's a lot to think about just in the mechanics, when you're not even thinking about storytelling. Just, will this work this way?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've read, I've read a lot of classic literature, and a lot of classics are written from omniscient third person perspective, but it doesn't seem to have the same kind of issues, and I think that just goes to, these are masters of in their field, and they know what they're doing, but it's one of the I think it's one of the hardest POVs to write and pull off.
Yeah It can be done well, but then even sometimes when I'm reading some of the really good stuff, like I'll go, wait, what's going, oh, okay, they're in this other person's head now, okay. And it takes a second, even as an experienced reader reading an experienced writer, to sometimes follow it. And I find that too sometimes when just as a reader, when I start a new writer for the first time, I'll read what they're writing like very slowly. For me anyway, I'm not a speed reader to begin with, but it'll take me 20-30 pages before I'm like, okay, I kind of got them figured out now, and then I can really start flowing through it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I had to reread, I just finished Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. You've heard of him?
I've heard the name before.
He's mainly he's mainly a short story writer. He's like a brilliant short story writer. And so I think this was his first novel, and I was really excited to read it, and started reading it, and got like 60 pages in, and then I was just like, what is this book? Like, it's the way that it's not laid out like any other novel I've ever read. It's like snippets, little snippets of it would be head hoppy, except that he puts who's talking below these little snippets of conversation, and then he blends that with chapters that are like snippets of like pieces of biography or journalistic entries. It's historical fiction about Abraham Lincoln. His son dies during the Civil War. His 11-year-old son dies, and so it's his historical fiction heavy on the fiction, where it's what happens to little Willie Lincoln, what happens to his soul or whatever, and after he passes. And so we get to see these conversations with people that are basically ghosts, and like he becomes a ghost, and they're in denial about being dead, and it's so bizarre, and yet it's like it's tethered to like this historical time and actual like historical texts and stuff. So anyway, I started reading and I was just like, what is going on here? And I had to like start over and be like, okay. So the first guy who's talking isn't Lincoln. It's this other guy, find that out. And he doesn't, and he's dead, I had to read it twice to get it.
Man, that actually made me think of a couple of different stories where, oh gosh, what's the guy's name? He got in trouble on Oprah because he lied about a piece of fiction, saying that it was an autobiography. It was a while back. James Frey, that was his name. pretty sure. He wrote My Friend Leonard and 1,000 Tiny Pieces, something like that, and passed one of them off as like a true story of his addiction, but then find out later that his publisher told him to publish it as an autobiography, or as a memoir rather, because it would sell better, not realizing that it would sell millions of copies and he would get invited on Oprah. But that dude, I read his book, Bright Shiny Morning, and it's a novel, but it's like a collection of short stories about different people in Los Angeles. Some of them intertwine, some of them don't. But he doesn't use quotation marks and very sparingly uses commas. And so that's one of those books where it takes you a few dozen pages to just kind of get into his rhythm and start intuitively picking up when it's someone talking and when it's not.
Yeah, and George Saunders does that too. I don't think I saw a quotation mark in that entire book.
Yeah, and it's weird, but like once you get used to it, it's like a second language, but it starts to make sense after a while.
Yeah. Some of it's actually like it's blatantly misspelled, or he'll capitalize words like in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah,
and I know there's a reason for it, but I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. If it's some kind of postmodern thing, I'm not really sure, but
yeah, it's definitely
taking a big chance though, man. I feel like doing something like that, you got to have some balls, just because a lot of people look at it and go, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be doing it anytime soon, but
no, I'm not going to be taking those kinds of chances.
Oh, and what was the other one? Toni Morrison, one of her books where these two girls are like best friends, but then one of them gets like married off in an arranged marriage to this rich guy, and then they become like enemies, but then right towards the end of their life they become friends again. But the last scene, like, okay, big spoiler alert here if anybody doesn't want to have a Toni Morrison book spoiled for them. I can't even remember which one it is, but yeah, these two women, like something happens to them where they're both in an accident and they're both dying, and like as they're dying they reconcile, but he doesn't tell you which one is which while they're talking, because it's not really the point. The point is that they like found each other again in those last moments. But yeah, the idea of just playing with POV and structure and making your reader guess what's happening sometimes is, when done right, if you're Toni Morrison, or we're Toni Morrison, rest in peace, it can be fascinating to see how that plays with your reader.
Yeah. Well, and it's at the end of the day, it's art, so
exactly. Yeah.
It's how you want to express, the words on that page, is a completely artistic choice.
Yeah. I really, and people, people say artists, writers, but writing is an art. It's just not visual, not in the sense of like, oh, that's pretty, But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to paint that mental picture. Just like there's a lot of different paints you can use, lots of different styles you can embrace within it. I think maybe just the really hardcore readers, but all the writers, we talk about that stuff all the time. Oh, so and so is such an artist. That writer? What do you mean? Like, you don't get it. Next, JB and I get into publishing and promotion, because navigating the world of publishing is really tricky, especially if you're an indie/self-published writer. There's a lot to consider, and we talk about most of it. And also promotion, how to get out there and get your stuff seen. You're independently releasing both of your books. Did you at any point try to chase down agents or publishers, or did you kind of go, you know what, I can do this myself?
Yeah, I did. So with my first, when I first completed every last one, completed in air quotes, right. I probably sent maybe 20 queries, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep. It was just so monotonous and draining on me, and I felt like it was my creativity was just withering away.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep at it. And I think I got like, out of those 20 queries, I got like 3 actual rejections. And
Yeah.
nobody else got back to me. So I was like, if this is what it's going to be like, I don't know if I can handle much more of this.
Yeah.
But
They're like,
yeah, so for me,
we'll let you know in 6 to 8 weeks. And then they just never let you know.
yeah,
I've been there.
yeah. So rightly so. I mean, it wasn't a great story at that point. It was pretty chaotic. But yeah, I just decided, like I didn't, that whole process, to me just didn't, I just didn't feel like that's something that I wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
And then just the timeline, the timelines, and even if you do get an agent, like, that's why I see like people get agents and they get really excited they got an agent, but then, well, then what? Like, are you? And then they find you. Let's say they find a publishing house, and they offer you a contract, but like you said, like, what if the terms are just shitty? Do you just accept it because yay, I found an agent and I got a contract? Do I just sign it because So to me, it was kind of like, well, what if you don't want that deal? Do you get to say? I mean, I'm sure you get to say no, but
I actually talked to now my friend Jody Sperling on the podcast.
oh yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, he's a good dude.
I don't know him. I know him on Twitter.
I've leaned on him a lot for information, but he actually had a literary agent, and he eventually got to the point where he was like, "Listen, I don't think it's going to happen. So, thank you for all your hard work, but I'm going to put this out myself." And now I think he's like got 3 or 4 or 5 books all ready to go, and he's just going to put them out when he wants to, and he's working on building himself a good following through this podcast, the Reluctant Book Marketer podcast. Great podcast for anybody who wants to know more about the insides of publishing and all those things. Yeah.
And so there's just the whole trying looking, it just, there's nothing about it. To me, there's really no upsides to traditional publishing. I mean, not for me, right? Like it works for a lot of people, and
unless you just get one of those sweetheart deals where they're like, "Listen, we want 5 books. Here's $1 million."
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and if somebody came knocking on my door and said, "Hey, we want to put out your book," sure, but the just the process of me, like, begging for people to love my book,
waiting for the gatekeepers to go, "You're anointed now."
Yeah. Right. Anoint me.
But we're going to print, but we're not going to publish this for 2 years because we have several titles in front of yours that we'd like to put out. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're on their schedule. They have the rights to your book. So if they end up selling it to Netflix or whatever to make a movie, then that's their book. And they can whatever.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. If anybody listening does get offered a contract, look over that thing really hard, because I know at least one guy who got screwed hard with the rights to his characters to the point where he had a series of books and he has to now wait an extra 2 years, I think it is, before he can finish the series. Otherwise, like, he could get sued for writing about his own characters.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I heard something recently just about Spotify, that if you put because I guess they do audiobooks now.
Oh
yeah, I don't use Spotify, but yeah, you can get audiobooks on there, and it's in their contract that if they distribute your audiobook, then they basically have the right to do whatever they want. They can use it for they could create their own fan fiction from it, or create their own sequels. And
that's some dystopian shit right there.
I know.
I saw in one of your posts that you're getting most of your books from Amazon. Have you looked at other places to try to get them cheaper?
I have them on Ingram Spark, and that's mainly for. I don't order my own copies from there, but they're about more expensive than KDP.
Yeah.
But I have them there because bookstores prefer to order from Ingram Spark. So I have it listed there for them. And there's a couple of local bookstores that carry my book.
Yeah.
But just and I haven't done as much as you have in terms of, like signing events and like, actually like being out in the public selling your book. I haven't done a whole lot of that. So this is my first one, was this past week. And then I've got another one coming up in March. I'd like to do more of it. So, but to me, so this is a terrible thing happened with KDP. And I don't know if it's representative of the way they normally do things, but so something happened with the shipment. So I had this event on Thursday, and the books were supposed to arrive on Tuesday. So it was already kind of a tight window. But I get an email on the Saturday before saying that there was a problem with my shipment. And I ordered two. There was one, the way they divide the books up, and I don't understand what their reasoning is, but one shipment had all 30 of my new book and like 3 of my old book. And then the other book had just the old book. And so it was just the copy, just the shipment with my new book it was damaged somehow. And so they said, if you don't get them by, Monday, check back with us and, we'll update you. And so I was like, okay. So on Monday, I get an email that says, we're issuing you a refund for your books. Their books were sent back to the printer and we're issuing you a refund. I was like, I don't want a refund. I want my books.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just, and so I called them and, I was talking to these, I also know that these customer service people are like, they work for Amazon. They're not Amazon.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be very, polite with these guys.
And they're probably just barraged left and right because Amazon
I know,
is
and
humongous.
I know. And, but I was just like, please explain to me how, I can order my own book, at the retail price and get it in 2 days. Why can't I get my author's copy in the same amount of time?
Yeah.
And we just can't do it. We just can't do it. I don't know. They don't have like the people that the guy I was talking to, like literally doesn't have any power within Amazon. He doesn't have a direct line to Jeff Bezos, but so I ended up with like a $5 promotional credit as an apology. And I just had to reorder my books, and I'm not going to get it until hopefully I'll get it before my next event.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but that's
off air. If you ever want to know, I know at least 2 places that will print for about actually a little less than half the price. And one of them, I believe, includes shipping, but it's on orders of like at least 800 or something like that books. Or maybe it's 500.
Yeah, I probably won't be ordering that many books.
Yeah. So yeah,
but that kind of stuff, like the shipping stuff, like things getting damaged. I'm not mad about that. I know that that kind of stuff happens, and it's not,
Yeah, I've gotten books from Amazon too, where just like one cover, a book got put in, but the cover got like bent in half, and you just send it back, and they give you a refund or whatever.
Yeah. None of that kind of stuff happens. It's just when you need it by a specific time, you're relying on their, this behemoth company to like get it right,
Yeah.
But yeah.
And
so
I think they also might do it to offer you expedited shipping prices. Oh, you want it fast? Pay more. Like what? No, just send it like a normal order.
That's the thing with KDPs. They don't do that. They don't offer, because I looked into that, and I was actually thinking about, because
I thought they used to. Maybe
does. Yeah, they don't. It's just you'll get them when you get. It's like usually 10 days. It's literally what it says.
Yeah.
When you order it, you'll get it usually in 10 days. It took 15 to get half my order. But I looked up Ingram Spark, and they do have, like, you can pay for like a rush printing where they can print it in 1 day. But you end up paying, like, instead of, I think the book was like $550, $560, something like that.
Yeah.
And it would have been $8 to do it 1 day printing. And I was like, okay, that's not too bad. But then to get it there, because then they had like 2 days shipping, but then that was like $35. And so I'm only ordering, I'd only be ordering like 10 books for this signing event. So that would end up being like $15 a book, which is what I'm selling it for.
Yeah.
So
which,
if
your back is absolutely up against the wall and it's like that or don't have books. And I've seen people do that before too. I talked to one writer who I was fortunate enough to be given a space to where I could host an event. And I hosted something where I invited artists and writers out together to all kind of sell their stuff just because I like that vibe. And one author was like, oh, well, I'll have to order some books, rush shipping, but yeah, I can do that. And then they got there and they're like, I normally charge $15, but I had to pay $16 per copy. Should I charge more? And I was like, I mean, you should at least try to make your money back. Yeah. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
But I was just like, oh man, that sucks.
Yeah. I probably would have done it. I would have been fine breaking even just because I'd rather have people, I'd rather have my books out there,
Yeah.
But this
I've definitely
particular
lost
one,
money just giving books away before because I'm like, you seem like a cool person. Here, review this when you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's funny is I ran Amazon ads for, I did one of those Kindle free promotions. It's like, where I was giving my book away for free. End up spending like $100 on, Amazon ads just to give my book away for free.
Yeah.
Or not Amazon, Facebook ads.
Yeah. I did one of those free giveaways one time, and then I got all excited because I saw a spike in sales, and then I was like, oh, those are all free.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yes, I'm selling books. I'm not getting any money for them though.
Yeah. But it does take a little bit of that. And that's the business part that's hard to figure out too, because it's especially if you're planning on writing multiple books throughout, your life, your career, whatever you sometimes you got to take the old drug dealer method and be like, here's a book for free and hope they come back for more to pay.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and that's pretty much that's a pretty well worn promotional strategy, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I do with my newsletter. I don't think anybody that subscribes to my newsletter can get my book for free, basically, because I'm always including them on like ARC readers and things like that. So yeah, I'm basically just giving it away.
Yeah. All right. Well, as far as promotion goes, you said that you've done some of the KDP promotions and stuff like that. But I really like getting in front of people because then you can talk to them, you can politely harass them to at least check it out and give it a look. How have you been finding event? Well, no, that sounds really confusing. How has it been for you finding events and then participating in the events?
So the Tucson Festival of Books is a huge event, and there's like 125,000 people that go there every year. I would have my original book was I didn't apply in time to make it to last year's festival, so I made sure that as soon as I heard that they were taking applications, I immediately applied for that one. So that's a no-brainer, at least here in Tucson, or in Arizona. Everybody comes to the Tucson Festival of Books. So that that'll be a yearly thing for me, I think.
Yeah.
And then this
those
other
big
one,
events like that, I think a lot of authors, myself included, last year when I had a couple chances to go to like a more of a convention style event, I just looked at the price tags to get in and was like, but the more I've talked to people, especially my friend Jody, shout out again to Jody Sperling. He's like, man, if you aren't afraid to be a little bit of a salesman, you can make a couple $100 a day at those things. Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the entry fee was, I think it was like $45, but you're basically, but you're entering, it's basically like entering a contest. So your book gets entered into like a literary contest. So that's pretty, I've seen them much higher than that, to enter your book into
I've seen some types of things are $300-$400 for a 6-foot table.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and yeah, that's the thing is like, I've we have, like makers fairs and just different things around town. But yeah, when you look at the cost of the booth, it's like, I don't know, like I'd have to
Yeah.
sell a lot of books and nobody knows who I am yet. So
Yeah. And it's really hard to
maybe
know when you
someday.
haven't already gone through. Like at this point, I don't feel nearly as nervous or anxious about getting into certain events because I know, oh, these people always host a really good one. Or last year, foot traffic at this one that I didn't get into was insane. So you can start to kind of chart out a course, but it's all kind of just guessing and hoping the first time through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the one that I just did this week, Stacks Book Club
Mm,
in Oro Valley, where they just opened last summer, and I had contacted the owner before. Oh, I knew that they were opening, so I contacted the owner and gave him a copy of my book
yeah,
because I was like, "Hey, when you open, you want to, would you be willing to put my book on your shelf?" And so I gave him a copy to to read it, and yeah, so since they've opened, I've been there like almost every week. Like I go there to write. I go there to just have some good coffee and buy books and
nice.
things like that. So yeah, so I already had that relationship with the store owner. So when he announced that he was going to be doing this local book fair, he shot me an email. He's like, "Hey, hint, hint, apply to this thing."
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Network and
so I got
relationship building is key to a lot of that stuff.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I'm hoping there's more of that coming my way.
Yeah. And
But yeah, I enjoyed
I'm
it.
sure that it will too, because as you go through, you'll meet other people. And it's been happening to me where people have gone like, oh, hey, I'm going to be selling at this thing. You want to come and sell with me and we can split a table? I'm like, oh, yeah. So as
Hmm.
you get out there and meet more people, especially if, you're a pretty outgoing guy, or at least seems that way to me. Maybe not. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, if you're outgoing and you can talk to people, then yeah, each event your community gets just a little bit bigger and more people kind of let you know what's up and invite you to things and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, it's basically just been online. Yeah, I started I did Amazon ads for a while, and I felt like they didn't really work for me.
Some people
I
they work great for. It seems like romance authors. If you're a romance
Yeah.
author, buy those ads, man. I know romance authors that make a killing on those ads, but I talk to other people that work in like science fiction horror and they're like, yeah, man, I maybe got a couple, but it was the money I made still was in the red for how much it cost to run the ads.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
where I found myself with those too.
Hmm. Yeah, and I even adjusted like the daily spend limit to like $10 a day.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I don't know, I don't have $10 a day to spend on this, but let's see if this affects the algorithm. And it didn't. I was paying like $5 a month on the ads, and so I shut that down, and then I went to Facebook, and Facebook is happy to spend all of your money. So if you have a budget, they will spend all the way up until the penny. So I did fairly well with Facebook ads. Haven't and I need to get back on that. So
Yeah.
far, that's been the most in terms of paid advertising. That's kind of what's worked for me. Otherwise, I've just making friends on the socials, and letting people know when I got a book coming out. And
Yeah. That
yeah.
that goes a long way. It really does. Except I won't say their username or anything, but I've had one person on Twitter who for the last couple months now, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks, hey, listen, next time I get paid, I'm buying your book. And then a month goes by. Hey, I didn't buy your book yet, did I? No. Okay, cool. Next week I get paid and then I'm gonna buy it. And we've been going through this for like almost a year.
She just like, dude, let me just send you my book. And
Yeah. I was like, you want a free ebook? And they're like, no, 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 I want the paperback. I'm like, do you though?
yeah. Yeah. Um,
Oh, on that
that
note.
and
Oh, no, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, I was just going to say, besides being on social media, I think having an email newsletter is also um, you know pretty smart. Although I
Yeah.
think that like I said, like I think I've given my book away more through my newsletter, but that again, that's more like that's just building relationships, and again, like it's just part. I think it's part of the building an audience. right?
Yeah.
So that's
Totally.
kind of the cost of of having a I hate to say following, but yeah, people that care about what you have to say.
Yeah. It feels weird to be like, my followers, my fans, my readers, but I mean, like,
Yeah,
I guess that's technically what they are.
yeah,
But yeah, it sounds like you have a healthy check on your ego. All right, kids, we're getting near the end. I had one other real question that I wanted to ask JB after I read his book, Tourist Trapped. Do you write about this drug stuff from experience, or?
So that was basically, I had to figure out a way, how do we get him there?
Yeah.
And so then that's where it came, the idea of a psychedelic cult who does this spirit for a spiritual enlightenment / recreation. And so so that it came out of the, like solving a problem. Like, how do we, I knew I wanted to be able to temporarily travel there.
Yeah.
And so how would we get him there? And so I just came up with, well, it would have to be something, on the level of like consciousness, and how would we have to, alter consciousness in a way that where the veil slips away.
Yeah.
And so that's, it's like, oh, drugs do that.
Have you had people ask you, are you big into shrooms, man?
Yeah, they do.
Are they disappointed when you're like, nah, not really?
No, never. Yeah. No. I had a guy at the signing the other day who was like, telling me all about his own psychedelic use. And I'm like, cool, I think you'll really like this book. It's like, yeah, man.
You should have taken your pad out. Hold on a second, man. Let me take some notes.
Yeah. So no, not on that. It's just, I know enough about it, just from a so I'm a therapist, so I have a background in psychology and mental health, and what I know about it from an academic perspective. So, but not personally. No.
Yeah.
Weed's a different story, though. There was a lot of weed use in Tourist Trapped as well.
Yeah. Is it legal there?
Yeah.
It is? Okay. I know it is in, I think, 38 states now, at least medically, including where I am. But yeah, I know there's a few spots still that are some, very conservative states that kind of don't want it. But yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to get out there to the people that we haven't already talked about?
I mean, I don't think so. I think we kind of covered the gamut, right?
Yeah, we've been talking for a while, so yeah.
Also, just like Sunday, and I don't have anything else going on, so.
Cool, man. I'm glad I didn't delay you from your other plans by pushing back. I just
no problem.
We ended up leaving late, and we ended up getting somewhere to meet with some other family, and then that got delayed, and it just ended up turning into like, oh shit, I gotta get back to JB and see if he'll let me push back an hour. So thank you for your flexibility.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and thank you for being on too, man. It's fun to talk to you. Last time we talked on, I think, an Instagram live, and then at some point, one of our feeds ended up freezing. So
yeah,
man. Good catching up with you, and we'll do this again. Let me know anytime in the future when you've got stuff coming out, and we'll help you back on here and help you promote it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right, cool, man.
Right on.
I'm going to hit end record here, but hang up for just a second.
Okay.
All right, everybody. That was JB. Thanks, JB. All right, everybody. That was the first rechristened episode of A Podcast for Creative People. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you noticed a few little changes and enjoyed those little changes. And, stick around with me because this thing's going to continue to evolve. Thanks for being part of the journey of it. Go check out JB in the show notes. I'll catch you guys next time. Mwah.